Older Rudeus, who is the future Rudeus, came back to the past to prevent all Rudeus from ending up like him, trying to avoid such tragedies by completely changing the past, primarily because who he became and the people he lost. So how did Rudeus ended up becoming his worst version? Hated, alone and with no one. Today I'm going to tell you about it, because just like you, I love Mushoku Tensei and I try to bring the best content I can to my viewers, so join the great community to receive the best of the otaku world. This happened a bit later in the light novel, after Rudeus' marriage to Roxy and a battle against Atophy on the Demon Continent. One night after all of this, the future Rudeus, not our boy, not the protagonist of the anime, but his future version, in this case in his timeline. The future Rudeus would be visited by Hitogami in his dreams, where the human god would give him a tip, telling him to go to his basement and check for something that might be there, advising him to do so. We know that Rudeus doesn't trust Hitogami, but so far the human god have never lied to him, so he decides to give it a chance and goes to the basement that night, but he finds nothing inside it. However, what really happened is that there was indeed something there, a rat infected with a terrible disease, and Rudeus didn't notice the rat because he was focused on other things due to Hitogami's warning. So the rat left the basement when Rudeus entered, and then he wandered into the kitchen, finding leftovers and eating them, which resulted in his infection spreading to the food, which Roxy later ate. In this case, in the middle of the night, she woke up hungry and then goes to the kitchen and eat the leftovers, which was infected by the rat. They didn't realize that immediately, since the rat died on the next day and Aisha threw away with the leftovers along with the body. However, Roxy ate before that and thus contracted the disease. Additionally, it is extremely rare for someone to have petrification syndrome, as it only affects pregnant women, and they didn't know about her pregnancy at the time. And yes, at this time, Roxy was pregnant. Roxy then became very ill, gradually losing mobility until reaching a terminal stage where she was almost bedridden. The healing and detoxification magic that Rudeus possessed didn't work on her in this stage. Only god-level detoxification could cure Roxy, but this magic was guarded under tight security by the Milice Church, being highly secured and extremely precious to the country. So in order to get that, Rudeus, Cliff and Zanoba decided to go after it, and devised a plan to save Roxy, and that plan was to steal the god-level magic from Milice together. The three of them set out for the holy city and snuck inside, actually finding the spell, but they were discovered and had to flee quickly with the book in hand. However, the escape was no means easy, and Cliff was struck by poison during their flight, and the worst part, he couldn't be cured in the time and died shortly after, so they lost Cliff. Additionally, Rudeus and Zenoba become wanted criminals and enemies of Milice for the rest of their lives, and this was also the adventure where Rudeus killed someone for the first time, leaving him deeply shaken. So Rudeus and Zenoba, the two survivors, returned from Milice, but they arrived too late. Roxy was already dead. Devastated by Roxy's death, Rudeus began to change here, walking down a darker path, so to speak. It was around this time that Ares arrived in Sharia and encountered Rudeus at the city gates for the first time in years. Ares yelled at Rudeus after finally seeing him and hearing the rumors about him and his family, that he had two wives. Here, Rudeus told her about his family and said he didn't have time to take care of her, causing her to distance herself from Rudeus, while Ghislaine despised him. After that, Rudeus went to Elinalice to tell her about Cliff's death. There, after hitting Rudeus, she left and never returned, and Rudeus never again heard about it. Rudeus at this point was at his limit, unable to bear anything and living in a limbo, not getting out of bed and crying constantly. Sylvie tried to cheer him up, but couldn't. Rudeus wouldn't take the first step to get out of this pit. Now, Rudeus is always drinking. Sylvie argues with him to stop. Lilia talked to him, and this just led him to spend a lot of time drinking away from home. Ares also shows up constantly. She would yell at him, scream at him, and then hid him for a while. Norne also started despising Rudeus and treating him like trash for the way he's been acting together. At this point, Sylvie began desperately trying to comfort Rudeus, being aggressive and doing everything she could, but she couldn't break through the barrier he had built around himself here. And then, during one of his routine drinking sprees, Rudeus ended up sleeping with a woman of the night, and when Sylvie found out about it, she stopped talking to Rudeus, which eventually led to her leaving him and returning to Ariel's side. At this point, even Lilia and Aisha started to feel strange about Rudeus and what he had become. Zenith too, even being at her dreamlike state, she would hit Rudeus, asking him to return to life. And waking up from that state, Rudeus decided to pursue Sylvie, but he was too late. Hitogami had already spoken with Luke in his dreams, and under the influence of the human god, Luke, Ariel and Sylvie returned to Asura. And then there was another problem. Ariel had not gained the support of Perugius or anyone else, so she was still the weakest of her siblings. And when she attempted to cope with her few allies, both of them, Ariel, Luke and Sylvie, were exterminated. And all of this before Rudeus could get to Ashura. On his way to Ashura, Rudeus would encounter Ares again, where she would talk about giving Rudeus another chance, but he was insensitive again, which resulted in her fighting with him and then him attacking her with magic for the first time. This was the first time since the back of Ares that Rudeus used magic on her, and of course this was a mistake. Upon arriving in Ashura, Rudeus would be stopped as he was considered an enemy of Melis and also a criminal in the kingdom. He obviously fled from them and crossed the border in ways different from the other people. And then he reached the capital, and Rudeus witnessed the cruel reality of Sylvie's death. Her body was publicly displayed, and the people jeered and threw stones on her, and this of course infuriated Rudeus. Rudeus first burned their bodies, and afterward he burned everyone gathered in that square in front of him. Every single people burned. And from this point on, this was the life of Rudeus. Violence, self-pity, drugs, alcohol, and although the few years after Sylvie's death wasn't well documented, what I just said summarized basically everything. In these years, the entries of his diary is basically full of hand-on woman and the other things of sort. He spent years indulging in this lifestyle. Ares still appeared frequently, always hitting Rudeus whenever she saw him. Aside from that, he still had bounties on his head, so sometimes he needed to defend himself from assassins and such, but he did so with ease. Then few more years passed, and at this point, Rudeus became quite important to Ranoa, and because of this, the kingdoms of Ashura and Melis couldn't capture him, even though they really wanted. Here, he and Zanoba also worked on projects together, with Zanoba being someone who greatly helped Rudeus and stayed by his side all this time. Then, sometime later, Hitogami would appear in Rudeus' dreams again, but everything would change here. He would mock Rudeus, call him a fool, and reveal that he had planned everything, the deaths of everyone. Here, he would despise Rudeus and even pat his shoulder, and because of this, Rudeus was now consumed by hatred and began to pursue magic to become more powerful. Instead of learning grandiose spells, upon realizing that beyond a certain levels, spells weren't as effective, Rudeus focused on strengthening his foundations. Additionally, he created a magical armor with Zanoba, based on the golden armor of the god of fight. Now Rudeus would begin traveling around the world in search of a way to reach Hitogami. During this journey, he would meet many people but gather very little information about him. He trained tirelessly, created new spells, and gradually became much more powerful while researching his enemy's traces. Over time, he became a master of gravity magic and developed various electricity spells, in addition to reaching the saint level healing magic. At some point, Rudeus became so powerful that he concluded that magic could be used to do anything, as long as one researched and learned how. However, although he was making great progress, he wasn't getting any closer to Hitogami, and because of this, he began to grow more bitter and filled with hatred. From this point on, his life was miserable, full of fights, deaths, disdain for others, women, and many crimes. Rudeus completely lost his way in life here. Ares still appeared frequently, but it was always the same. She would hit him, they would fight, and she would try to knock some sense into him, but he would just move on. After lots of this, Rudeus then went to Atofi and forced her to reveal everything what she knew about Hitogami, since she was was old and immortal. However, he let his guard down for a minute, and someone attacked him, and to protect Rudeus, Ares jumped in front of the attack, dying in the process. And soon after that, we jump forward in the time again. Now Zanaba will die at the hands of Milis, who infiltrated Ranoa and burned everything he had. Rudeus of course killed all of them, annihilating every one of them while sinking deeper into his guilt, loneliness and disdain. After that, he would become obsessed with Hitogami on a new level. He had already lost everything, so his life's goal became to destroy this god. And after a lot of researching, he would find clues and ancient murals from the dragon folk, where they documented their attempts to reach Hitogami as well. And so Rudeus would spend his next years searching for Hitogami, ruins and people who could help in this discovery, and after a long time he finally found a way to reach the human god. But now his body was old, over 60 years, and he wouldn't get there in time. It would take a few more decades to gather the necessary things to reach Hitogami, and Rudeus was already at the end of his life, on the verge of breaking. With that, in the midst of his exhaustion, bitterness and everything else within him, Rudeus would think about the tests he developed during his earlier research, time travel magic. He then began to develop and research it, and of course it would consume a massive portion of his magical power as well. But he succeeded in creating this magic, and then Rudeus performed the magic, but it was a failure since he didn't have mana enough for that. Yes, even his mana pool wasn't enough to get this spell. With this spell, Rudeus managed to go back in time, to the day when Hitogami spoke him about the basement and before Roxy got sick. But there was a problem. The magic was flawed due to the lack of mana. The old Rudeus returned, but his organs didn't come with him, and because he was out of magic, he couldn't heal himself either. Here he would meet our Rudeus, the young Rudeus, the one whose history we have been reading and following. Then the old Rudeus would spend the little time remaining of his life explaining the most things he needed to convey to him. Along with this, he would give him his journal, saying that in this journal he wrote everything he needed to. But for him, the most important is that of all the things, the young Rudeus only needed to remember 3 crucial ones. The first, consult Nana Hoshi and help her, as well as ask of her help in all of this, or she would meet a tragic end. The second, write a letter to Ares, make peace with her, admit that you still loves her. And the third and lastly, doubt Hitogami, but do not oppose him, as that wretch is very powerful, and the young Rudeus doesn't have the power to oppose him. And with all of this said, the old Rudeus would pass his diary to the past Rudeus and die. With the diary in hand and knowing all of this, many things would change in our Rudeus perspective, especially regarding Ares. And in this video, I will explain what Ares has been doing since she left Rudeus and how she's been preparing to return to him. So watch, that is very good. Now, goodbye.